Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Mycelia from Splitstone Games. Mycelia is a 1 to 4 player tableau building area control game of mushroom manipulation, and yes, that alliteration is intentional. The general idea of the game is you are going to be working with this little field over here that's going to start off in this 12 tile grid over here, in this little shape. You will be adding tiles to the board as you go, you'll be spreading spores, you'll be utilizing spores to plant new mushrooms, you'll be using those mushrooms to spore more spores, you'll be slowly decaying those mushrooms to benefit from their abilities, and then trying to score as many points primarily, mostly through the mushrooms you are going to be building as you go through the game. Every mushroom has a point value on it, and as soon as you are able to fruit that mushroom, you'll be getting those points, but even when you decay those mushrooms, you'll keep those points, but you'll also be getting abilities, either one-time use or ongoing abilities. I understand that was a whole lot of generic stuff to take in at once. So let's take it a step back over here. The way you're going to win the game is you're going to win the game by getting points from building mushrooms. There's also a who triggered endgame token over here. They'll be worth points, 5, 4, or 3, depending on the length of the game you are playing, but primarily you want to build your mushrooms, or fruit your mushrooms as the game would call it. Game end is triggered once a player has decayed all 5 of their mushrooms. So as you fruit a mushroom, you'll place it onto your board. When you use that mushroom to spread spores, you're going to move this token down, and when the token goes to the end, basically every mushroom can move twice, and after that it will decay and it'll go underneath your board, these double layer boards over here, and give you an ability, again, either one-time use or ongoing abilities as you go. Once you've done that with all 5 of your mushrooms, that will trigger endgame. And again, the length of the game can be altered by having more or less of these tokens in play, of these little sheets over here of your player board. So again, now you understand how you win. You win the game by planting mushrooms, fruiting mushrooms, and getting the points on those mushrooms. Game end is triggered once the player has decayed one of each of the mushrooms. And yes, you can decay mushrooms multiple times in the same spot. You can have more than one mushroom in a spot, but once you've done so with all of your mushrooms, that will trigger game end. Which brings us to what is it that you do on your turn? Well, one of 6 possible actions, as helpfully pointed out on this player aid. You're either going to move, spore, fruit, discover, explore, and decay. Now I will go through that with a little bit more detail so you actually understand what you're doing over here, but first you have to take 2 different actions on your turn. The first action is you can move. You can go ahead and move your mother mushroom, that's this big guy over here, 1 to 2 spots on the board, so up to 2 spaces along edges, and you can go onto other mushrooms or onto spores, but you cannot go on top of other mother mushrooms. That's action 1. Action 2 is to spore. When you spore, you either spore from a mother mushroom or from one of your mushrooms that's already planted. So for example, if blue were to spore this slippery jack, they would roll the wind die over here, and the wind die would point to a specific area on the tile, in this case it's going to be going this way, and they would spore 3 because that's how many slippery jack spores as referenced on the card. When you spore from the mother mushroom, you spore 2 by default. So over here, we're going to spore 1 on the starting tile, and then we're going to go 1 on the tile it pointed to, and then the third one we can go to either direction. You're continuing the wind direction. In this case, we'll go ahead and put it here, because this way we might actually move our mushroom. Let's say for our second action, we're going to move our mother mushroom over here, which will give us a little bit of control over those spores. We'll talk more about that in a second, which I guess a second is now, because fruit is the third action. When you fruit, you're going to grow a mushroom by expending the corresponding spores. Now you just saw how I was able to get some mushrooms out. Now for my 2 actions, I went ahead and I spored, and then I moved. So we're gonna have to wait for red to take their turn. When it comes back to me, I can go ahead and fruit. Now when you fruit, you're going to look at a mushroom that you have, or any of these mushrooms. You're going to look at the cost to build that mushroom, which generally references the various player colors of these various fields over here, not player colors, the colors of the fields, and then you're going to spend that many spores from those matching colors. So for example, this one would have to spend a brown, red, and green spore from a single grouped section. The good news is by moving over here, well, actually it doesn't help me because I don't need that yellow one, unfortunately, so we won't use that. In fact, I can't actually do this right now because I don't have access to a red spore right now. I don't actually have access because I have access to a brown spore, to green spores, and to yellow spores, but I don't currently have access to red spores, and black, by the way, is wild. So instead, maybe I won't fruit this turn, and it's important, by the way, to note that specifically because I moved into red's field, I now have control over these spores over here. In general, moving your mother mushroom into a spot will break up control. For example, over here, this is considered one grouping for red, and this is all another grouping, but by being in this spot, I've broken up control, and I control their spores. If I were to move out over here, then I would have control of these, including my own, and red would be able to have control of theirs, including their own. Basically, it's always your spores unless another mother mushroom is in that spot. Which brings us to the next action, Discover. Discover is where you're going to pick up a new mushroom card from the deck or from the 3 on display. So you can take from the top of the deck or from the ones on display, and generally you're going to want to do so based on either what your spore control currently is, or alternatively because you want to work your way towards certain abilities or points, and you'll just make it happen because you want those abilities or points. The next action is Explore. When you explore, you're going to pick up a triangle tile, and you're going to add it anywhere on the board. So for example, we can go ahead and add this here, which will mess with the configuration of the board and allow for more spore spreading and possibly more area control. And then the last action is Decay. Once you have spored from a mushroom twice, you can decay a mushroom, and you'll get the ability, again, whether one-time or ongoing abilities, that will help you in the game. So for example, this ongoing ability is if you pick up a card from the deck, you pick 2 and discard 1. So if you don't like the mushrooms on display, you can grab 2 cards and discard 1 of those cards. Over here we have Satan's bullet over here, where you can perform the same action twice, giving you a lot of flexibility over what you can do on your turn because you're no longer limited to having 2 different actions. Those are the 6 actions you're going to be taking. 2 actions per turn, trying to take those actions to ultimately to spore primarily to be able to get your resources into the wild, hoping to control them as much as you can yourself, but understanding that sometimes other players will swoop in with their mother mushroom and take control. Then you'll be fruiting that into actual mushrooms where you can get the points and the abilities and start to get your mushrooms into the decay state, and once all those mushrooms have decayed, that will trigger endgame. You can get the endgame token, which will be worth, again, 5, 4, or 3 points, and then see who won the game in Mycelia. Which brings us to the review, where I'm going to cover what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which to begin with, the game is very accessible and easy to learn. Also, I should note the insert. Let me actually show you this over here. The insert is fantastic over here. So if you see this insert, everything stores perfectly into it. It's a great material. Overall, a phenomenal insert as far as the storage capabilities of the game. But again, the production, the general art, the aesthetic, although I will have a nitpick about that as soon. But then most importantly, the game is fairly accessible and easy to learn as far as what it is you're doing. This is a degree of area control with a degree of tableau building. These 6 actions are clearly laid out on the player aids, and it's pretty straightforward as far as how the game operates, while giving you an accessible amount of strategy. There are opportunities to be clever in the game, including manipulative play where you take things from others for better and for worse. There's lots of times when you're trying to figure out how to get your spores in play, and how to make sure they're as least easily poachable by your opponents, because if you're not careful, your opponents will poach your spores in this game. So you have to really try to figure out how to spread out onto the board, how to get your own spots, using your mother mushrooms to not just take from the opponent, but also to stop your opponent from taking from you, and to work your way towards the mushrooms you either currently have, or taking the actions to gather mushrooms that will work together with the abilities you already currently have, and figuring out what your right combination of one-time use abilities, ongoing abilities, and point scoring that will drive the endgame condition. The mushroom abilities sync well with each other, giving you a lot of ways to feel like you're building up your own tableau that is better or more proficient at trying to get you towards those points as you go through the game. So overall, it is an easily accessible game, pretty easy to pick up and learn and to teach, gives you a decent amount of strategy as far as what you're trying to do, and has you building up a nice tableau with just the right hint of meanness in the game. As far as things I don't like in the game, first of all, the game start feels a bit weird and or slow, because the board is going to start off mostly empty as far as the spores go, which means you're going to be taking actions to start spreading spores, knowing full well that the nature of the early game when you're all in the same spot means the things you do at the beginning are almost just creating spores for your opponents to possibly take pretty quickly, because again, you have to get spores out into the wild. You don't have control over where they're going to go because of that wind die. It's going to be one of the directions you can't control for that, which again, we'll talk about that soon. And so the beginning of the game, I find whenever I play this, is usually just a bunch of, I'll draw a card and spore, I'll draw a card and spore, I'll draw a card and spore, I'll move and draw a card, I'll move and spore, oh look, now there's enough stuff on the board, now we can actually start the game. So I do wish the start of the game seeded a bit differently, because as it stands for me right now, the start of this game every time I play it is a little bit slow and weird. Past that, the other complaint I have, which is probably a bigger complaint because it's not just about the start of the game, is visually it's not always evident what's going on the board, both in terms of the trying to figure out where all your mushrooms are, but also because of the mother discs and the way they can cut into various regions of the board, it's not always immediately clear where your access to things is. Meaning, don't get me wrong, I can figure it out by looking and well, figuring it out. But as opposed to a game where I have a bunch of wheat and wood and whatever, sheep or who knows what, as opposed to that kind of system where I just have resources, you kind of have to look and figure out what resources you have, and that can slow down the game to a certain extent, as far as just, not really slow down the game, it slows down the intuitive aspect of play for the exact reason you saw as I was teaching you the game, where I was like, and I'll play this, oh wait, no, I don't actually have red because the red is on red, I'm not on red, red's a different color, so you do have the fact that the board is so busy and the fact that there's different colors in play, both your own as well as the player board itself. Again, the visual accessibility of exactly what's going on at any given point, I find that is missing. And then lastly, the game is not as tight as I would like at 2 players once the board starts to grow. At the beginning of the game, 2 players actually can still be fairly tight, and as the game grows in a larger player count, the game works fairly well still until it gets really large, but that's not really a problem for a while. But 2 players, once you start adding tiles to the board, it stops being tight, and so you lose some of the element of that cutthroat play or the blocking play. You definitely lose a little bit at 2 players. Now, I believe you can play with the Autonoma player even as a 2-player game. It is an Autonoma player for solo play. I believe you can play with it at 2 players. I haven't done so, and I tend to not like doing so that's not a solution for me, but it might be a solution for you. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, there's the wind mechanic. The wind mechanic is going to have you rolling the die over here and seeing where your spores grow, which means half of your game is basically up to the fate of the gods as to where things go. The reason I don't mind that is, especially as the board starts to develop, very often you make decisions knowing full well you can't perfectly guarantee things, and so to me the die adds a bit of chaos that you have to work with and around that offers strategic play, but you might not appreciate that, and you might just be frustrated that you just generated a bunch of spores directly into your opponent's mushroom. So whether it works for you or not is a question for you to figure out. And then secondly is the game can be mean, which again I appreciate that as well. The opportunities to cut in on your territory, benefiting from the spores you just created, that's a really satisfying moment for me. But it might not be a satisfying moment for you as it happens, so you have to be prepared for just a little bit of mean play as you go through the game. As far as final thoughts on Mycelia, overall I enjoy the accessibility of the game like I talked already. I enjoy the strategic play elements. I really enjoy the tableau building of getting abilities as you go through it. Again, this is ultimately a game of building mushrooms which are worth points, but the mushrooms give you one-time or ongoing abilities, so the things you need to do to get points and win is also the thing you do that gives you abilities and ongoing synergies, which is more satisfying to me. So the game is inherently rewarding me for doing the kind of thing that I like the most. There are a few small elements that bog the game down from making it a perfect experience, again, that visual accessibility being the big one for me, but overall it is a satisfying tableau building game that is fairly accessible, a 3.5 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, check out Eco's First Continent. Working in any sort of grid that has a shared puzzle that you're all trying to work with the same terrain and take advantage of things pros and cons, I found Eco's First Continent to be a very satisfying game in that genre. And if you're trying to take it up a notch both in terms of the strategy and also in terms of the meanness, you can check out Dominant Species. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you like this kind of thing and you want it completely ramped up on all counts, that's one that's worth checking out. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you appreciate this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.